Hi. I'm Rebecca. I eat books. I'm here to do September wrap up. September. The first weekend in September was Labor Day weekend, and my friends and I went canoe camping. It was amazing. 6 of us, 3 couples, Vermont on the Waterbury Reservoir. It was beautiful. We had great weather, good food, made fire every night. It was wonderful. A couple days after that, I was in Nashville for a few days doing some family stuff. When I got back from that, we had 2 friends who live in the city come down. We went to a concert here in New Haven. That was a lot of fun. And then we went back to Vermont for another weekend. My friends who live up there went home to DC, where I'm from. We house sat and dog sat and hiked Mount Mansfield. And then when we got back from that, it was the high holidays. And my aunt and uncle who live in California, who I love so much, came into town, dipped apples in honey and said, Happy New Year. It was great. That was my September. It was another busy month. I say that every month. September books. Ready? Okay. I read 7 books. Good month. Lots of really good thinky woman books. So the first book I read was Is Mother Dead by Vigdis Hjorth, sent to me by Verso. Comes out towards the end of this month, October 25th. I loved it. It's weird. Our narrator is an adult woman, an artist, a painter. At a young age, she left the husband that her parents had wanted her to be with and ran away to America. She's from Oslo, became a painter and dropped out of school and started this new life, became estranged from her family, and apparently presented some art called The Mother that very much offended her mother and embarrassed her. That added to the estrangement. After many decades of being in America, she has been sent back to Oslo on an art fellowship to do an opening in a gallery there. Upon returning to her hometown, she becomes obsessed with the idea of reconnecting with her mother. First person, laser focused on this obsession with the mother. It's very intense, claustrophobic. The woman becomes gradually more unraveled, obsessed. She starts stalking her own mother. The narrator of this book reminds me of the narrator of Death in Her Hands by Ottessa Moshfegh. I found this more successful than that, but similarly in that it is this one singular figure. You're in her mind as she devolves into an obsession that seems to be rooted in pain, a pain response. There are lots of questions, general themes in this book. Definitely who needs to be mothered, who requires mothering. Do we as adult figures who are mothers ourselves, do we still require mothering? Why does rejection from our own mothers feel so much worse than any other type of rejection? Also is asking questions about art. Can art ever be an attack? Can you be offended by art, or is art simply art? The conclusion of this book really revolves around this main character learning or relearning about her own mother's pain from when she was a child, recognizing that even as adults need mothering, mothers themselves need mothering, mothers have their own pain, mothers are people, recognizing this in a very refolding and refolding way. Does that make sense? I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a quick read. It's written in passages that are pretty short. You get really wrapped up in it. Is Mother Dead? Out October 25th. The next book I read was A Horse at Night. This book was sent to me by Dorothy Press, written by Amina Kane, whose writing I really like, is definitely a smart woman. And this is a non-fiction extended essay about reading, specifically reading fiction. That's a topic I really love. I really love to read about the reading habits, reading preferences, and the reading experiences of writers. I like to hear smart women talk about the books that inform them, interest them. I think this book had a lot of potential. For me, it felt a little scattered, unedited, and sort of meandering. I'm not sure if the book lacked some editing that would have provided some narrative structure and clarity, or perhaps I just was failing at attending to it. Entirely possible. But it felt like there were some really great nuggets. I really enjoyed reading about who Amina Kane likes to read and why, and how it informs her experience of living in society, in contemporary society. I do think that it felt unfinished. Perhaps that also is informed by the fact that I know that Dorothy Publishing does this really cool thing where it publishes one pair of books. It almost felt to me like they decided they were publishing this book at this certain month, and it was the book of the month before it was actually finished, and there was no extending the release date because they're under this strict publication schedule. Is that actually what happened? I have no idea. Probably not, but that's how it felt to me. I do think it's worth a read. It's very short. I just think it had so much more potential. I'm ready to read more Amina Kane. I said that last time. I am absolutely hooked on Amina Kane. I will read everything she ever writes. Her last book, which I gave to my boy Ben when he was here, I loved it right up until the end. I thought the writing was so beautiful, the sentences were delicious, and I thought her next book is gonna nail it. And this book didn't nail it. Fool me once, but I'm still in it for Amina. Next, I read The Wall. I loved this book. Marlene Haushofer, a Austrian woman. This book was published originally in the 60s, I believe, but is in a reprint from New Directions. Thank you, New Directions, for sending me this book. The premise is that we have this woman goes with a married couple that she's friends with to their country hunting lodge, house, dacha in the countryside for a weekend. They get up early one morning, go out to town. She stays in the country, and at some point a wall is erected, a completely clear glass wall. It separates her from the rest of society, and from what she can see through the wall, the rest of society is dead. All the bodies she can see on the other side of the wall are completely frozen in the position they were at one moment. She is the only living person that she knows of. She's on the other side of this wall with some animals. Her dog Lynx. There's some kittens. And there's a cow. And the book is written as her journal, her log on the day-to-day. So there's a lot of technical, this is how I'm keeping us alive. I milked the cow for this many hours. What I planted and harvested, very internal, has her thoughts. I think that you would describe this book as dystopian fiction. I would argue that in some ways it's like feminist utopian fiction. Stick with me here. Our narrator, our main character, she doesn't name herself, previously lived a life in which she was defined by her relations as wife, then widow, and mother. Those relations don't exist anymore in this new world, and she has the opportunity to redefine herself. She also recognizes that society as it was before this collapse was a unwelcome, hostile place to be a woman. And she has now been able to break free of all of that hostility and for the first time ever create a life of her own making, free of those constraints. In some ways, she even breaks free of womanness. She loses lots of weight and becomes very strong because she's doing all this manual labor. She doesn't see herself in the mirror. In some ways, she is completely without gender. She is just self and making a life entirely for herself, which is a very feminist thing. It was beautiful. It reminded me of a fictionalized take on Journal of a Solitude by May Sarton, the way that it is very concerned with gardening and making a life, filling your days. It's also written as a journal. Both books so perfectly recognize that while loneliness is a discomfort of solitude as a whole is a really beautiful, wonderful thing with so much to be grateful for. And both women express gratitude for the natural world and their surroundings and their agency over themselves and the natural world, their own survival and happiness. It's really beautiful. I think that the woman escaping from society is in some ways a trope, especially of like the thinky woman genre, right? In some ways, this book is the great-grandmother of My Year in Rest and Relaxation. Yes, that is my second Otessa Moshfegh reference in one video. I apologize. I think we see that a lot in literature, women having this impulse to escape, to recede from society, to recognize society's hostility towards women, to want to escape. Often they end in a return to society with some level of enlightenment. I enjoy that this book does not end that way. This book does have a really gruesome ending that I did not appreciate. I mean, I appreciate it, but I didn't enjoy it. You know what I'm saying? It's rough. It's not gonna spoil it to tell you that there is some animal death. I'm sorry. It's not a spoiler because she foreshadows it over and over again in the journal. She says, since Lynx, my dog, died, but you don't actually know the story of how he dies until the very end, and it's terrible. It's exactly as terrible as you think it might be. But I love this book, highly recommend. Favorite new read of the month. And then I read First Love by Gwendoline Riley. This I bought used at a bookstore a while ago, but it is being re-released, I think, by New York Review of Books, NYRB, one of their beautiful covers. This originally came out not that long ago, in 2017. Written in the first person by a character named Nev, unclear. It's about her relationship with her husband. This book is like brutal. This book is harsh. The two characters who are in a relationship vacillate between tenderness and accusations, fighting, verbal abuse, sort of seamlessly in a way I feel like you don't see from a first-person perspective. You wouldn't expect from a first-person perspective. I think that if you were talking to a friend of yours who was in the position that Nev is in, she was explaining to you her relationship, she would pick one narrative. She would say, yes, we cuddle up to each other and we make these sweet pet sounds. We have these cute pet names for each other, and he calls me Stinky Puss before I get in the bath. It makes these little cooing sounds when we cuddle. But none of that matters because he calls me a crotchety shrew and a bitch, and he yells at me all the time, and he's a terrible husband, and I hate him. Or you would hear the opposite. Yes, when he gets frustrated, he says these things, but he doesn't mean it. Look how much he loves me. He has these pet names and he cuddles with me. And there's sort of a remove, this flat demeanor in the way that she shares both of those things with you, not because it doesn't feel like a true first person, but because she has this recognition of the reality of this complicated relationship. It's clear that in many ways, the way that they speak to each other, the fights that they have, are about the resentment that they have for the need for each other. Edwin is older, he is sick, he has been obsessed with his freedom his whole life, he was never gonna settle down, and now he needs somebody because he has a heart condition. He resents this woman because he resents needing her and being sick and being old, and she's a reminder of these things. And she is dealing with the death of her father, and Edwin represents her negative relationship that she had with him. She resents him in the same way. They are taking those resentments out on each other in the way that Nev is critical of him. She's also critical of herself. She recalls past relationships she had, past romances, and she says, like, why did I say that? That was so dumb. That was so needy. She talks to herself the same way that he talks to her. It's also interesting that we never learn how these two meet. We never learn how these two end up with each other, and I think that's sort of the crux of the book. How do we end up with the people we end up with? How do we get to a place where we are partnered with these people who perfectly reflect our insecurities and our resentments back at us? I thought this was really well written. I'm excited that it's being re-released, and I'm excited to hear more people talk about it when that happens. Then the last 3 books I read this month, I did a little experiment where I picked 3 of my all-time favorite books and I read them over a week. 3 books that I love, favorites, but I read a really long time ago before I was doing Bookstagram or BookTube or whatever, so I never talked about them on here before. I wanted the chance to talk about them, but I also wanted to see if I still loved them, if they held up. So I read the second book in the Neapolitan Quartet, The Story of a New Name by Elena Ferrante. I read Housekeeping by Marilyn Robinson, and I read The Argonauts by Maggie Nelson. I did record a vlog of myself during the week reading these 3 books. It had been a long time since I vlogged, and it wasn't my best work. There are definitely some sound quality issues, and I'm really dragging my feet on editing it. So here's a question. Do you want me to finish editing and post this vlog that definitely has some sound quality issues, or should I just record another video like this where I sit and talk about my experience of rereading these books? What do we think? Should I trash the vlog footage and just talk, or should I upload it? I guess I could do both, but you don't need to hear me talk about these books twice. So write in the comments. Tell me what to do. Okay, those were my 7 books. Oh, and I have Rex. I didn't do it last month, but Somebody called me out on it, so I gotta give my recommendations. I have 2 podcasts and a television show to recommend. The first podcast is not literary at all, but it is narrative. It's called Storytime with Seth Rogen. Also, I will preface these recommendations by saying all of these are very old news. I am very late to all of these. You're not hearing about anything new from me. Okay, great. Storytime with Seth Rogen is exactly what it sounds like. Seth Rogen of Seth Rogen Stoner fame has a podcast where he invites people on. They tell crazy stories. I've listened to almost every episode at this point. There aren't that many. You can tell he has a lot of money to do this. Production value is very high. The stories are crazy. There was an episode in which he interviews a guy who was attacked by a bear and survived, and the story is wild. I'm gonna link to that episode in the notes. You should listen to this. It's crazy. I can't stop talking about it. Some of the stories are really funny, but some are not. Like the bear story is not funny. Really enjoy. The other podcast is literary. It's called Thresholds. I'll read the official description of Thresholds so I don't fuck it up. Thresholds, hosted by Jordan Kistner. There are 102 episodes, so we have plenty of listening to catch up on together, friends. It's a series of interviews with writers and artists you love about the transformative experiences that have shaped their work. Hosted by Jordan Kistner, author of the essay collection Thin Places. Thresholds is a Lit Hub radio podcast. Great. The people that are interviewed are amazing. Every author you could ever want. I posted on Instagram. I had just listened to her episode with Mary Ruffalo and it was so good. I have queued up an interview with Eileen Miles. There's Jeff Vandermeer, Sheila Heti, Sarah Manguso, Kesey Lehman, Melissa Phoebos. Really, honestly, anybody you could ever want to listen to. This could be the only podcast I listen to forever. What I really like about it is that it is interviews with these smart people. I love their brains, but it's not part of the publicity run for a certain book. Usually when you're listening to a podcast with your favorite author, it's because they've just released a new book and they're there to publicize it. They're going to answer the same 6 questions about how they wrote that book over and over again. You're going to hear the same interview, which is great. I listen to those interviews. I listen to every episode of NYRB, but these are not about their works. This is more about their life experiences and their process, and I really enjoyed it. And then the last recommendation I had was a TV show. It's, again, everyone and their mother has already watched this. I'm the last person on earth to get to it, but it's called Rehearsal on HBO, and it's so fucking weird and I love it. It's so weird and good. You know I love weird and good. It's hosted by Nathan Fielder. It's an experiment on the validity of the hypothesis of if we can practice our difficult life experiences before they happen, does that make them go better? Is there value in being able to rehearse and practice your life? He does it with an insane HBO budget. Like, we get it, HBO, you have too much money. He creates these super intricate sets, exact replicas of bars. It's wild. The show is crazy. I haven't finished it yet. I think I have 1 or 2 episodes left in the season. Got a little sidetracked because a new season of Great British Bake Off has started. Here's what I do not recommend: letting British people make pizza. In the 2nd or 3rd episode of the season, it's bread week and they make pizza, and the things that they make and call pizza, they should be put in jail for. Floppy, sad. One woman uses bean chili instead of tomato sauce for her pizza. Yeah, it should be illegal. And on that note, and I'll tell you what I'm currently reading. I'm, for some reason, decided to pick the biggest, thickest book on my shelf to read. So that is The Man Who Loved Children by Christina Stead. It's over 500 pages long, 1940. It takes place in Washington, D.C., and I am from D.C. I love books that take place in D.C. The characters live in Georgetown, which is not where I grew up. Georgetown is very fancy, but it's very close to where I grew up, and I very much enjoy all of the DC references. Very much is a corresponding piece to the Gwendoline Riley. It is also about a very unhappy marriage. Okay, that's me. That's my September. I hope you are all having beautiful autumnal experiences, carving pumpkins, drinking hot cider. And if you're not, please know that I have made it my personal mission to eat as many apples as I possibly can. Stomachache be damned. So I'm doing it for us all. I love you all. Love you, nerds.